drugs were a gift to a lot of these soldiers that were knee-deep in horror every day and saw the most repugnant things you could possibly imagine.
Get really stoned. Then, you know, like who cares about the war?
You think that we were using drugs on the home front? What was going on in Vietnam was the U.S. military was using even harder drugs. They were shooting up heroin.
It's the only way you can feel good in Nam, you know?
How available is it? In Nam? I used to buy off a kid who was 8 or 9 years old.
8 years old, 9 years old, 10 years old.
Initially, it wasn't that easy to find heroin in Vietnam, but because of the CIA and their alliances with various warlords, suddenly South Vietnam was flooded with very pure, very cheap heroin.
I was over in Vietnam a number of times with DEA. Saw stuff that was unbelievable.
And this is one of the places GIs buy drugs. Sometimes they stay inside until after they've had their fix. Other addicts wait outside, and a girl comes out, passes them the heroin, and makes the sale. It's all done in broad daylight.
I saw soldiers using drugs constantly. It was certainly accepted in the culture over there. I'm not sure I blamed them. I might have done the same thing.
In the spring of 1970, you had 2 people overdosing a month. By that fall, there were 2 people overdosing a day. 1 in 4 servicemen became addicted to heroin.
He came back a war hero, wounded twice, Purple Heart, but also a drug addict. He was a drug addict.
Well, 2 things are happening. Number one, we're hearing about soldiers becoming addicts, but we're also beginning to get flooded with heroin coming back from Vietnam. And one of the early cases I worked on was a group of sergeant majors in Vietnam who were shipping heroin back in body bags.
There might have been soldiers bringing it back for their own use and maybe in small amounts to do business. But really, the heroin being smuggled famously back in body bags was being smuggled by the CIA. It was really to support the warlords of Thailand, who were our allies. It was to secure their favor.
Many people would maintain that Air America, the CIA's operation in Southeast Asia, was responsible for a lot of the heroin that came in.
The result was blowback. You know, more drugs on the streets of American cities.
I saw my former classmates returning from Vietnam. Many of them came home with drug addiction problems. That was when I really became aware that there was a drug issue.
When I was in prison, many of my fellow prisoners were ex-Vietnam veterans who acquired huge heroin habits over there and came back and found that they couldn't maintain their habits in America, and so they reverted to what they knew best, which was weapons and tactics. So they robbed banks.
It was becoming obvious that there was a direct correlation between street crime and heroin addiction. And this got Nixon's attention very quickly.
We must wage what I have called total war against public enemy number 1 in the United States, the problem of dangerous drugs.
And we reading through the documents, and then that's when Gary Webb started explaining to us, and we was like, everything came together now.
One of the most paramount moments, perhaps caused by Gary Webb's Dark Alliance, took place in November of 1996.
It was a monumental historic event. I mean, the director of the Central Intelligence Agency was coming to Watts to face the people.
Now, we all know that the U.S. government and the CIA supported the Contras in their efforts to overthrow the Sandinista government in Nicaragua in the middle 80s. Now, it is alleged the CIA also helped the Contras raise money for arms by introducing crack cocaine into California.
I am a former Los Angeles police narcotics detective, and I work South Central Los Angeles, and I will tell you, Director Deutsch, that the agency has dealt drugs throughout this country for a long time.
And I was able to name operations.
Director Deutsch, I will refer you to 3 specific agency operations known as Amadeus, Pegasus, and Watchtower. I have Watchtower documents heavily redacted by the agency. I was personally exposed to CIA operations and recruited by CIA personnel who attempted to recruit me in the late 70s to become involved in protecting agency drug operations in this country.
He stumbled and stammered and wrung his hands.
If you have information about CIA illegal activity in drugs, you should immediately bring that information to wherever you want, but let me suggest 3 places. The Los Angeles Police Department.
And of course my response was, I started there 18 years ago, sir, and they tried to kill me. Now what do you want me to do?
If this information turns up wrongdoing, we will bring the people to justice and make them accountable.
The crowd started chanting, "We told you, we told you, we told you." And it was a great moment of unity. And it was a healing moment for me, because I'd been out alone for 18 years and didn't really know that kind of support was there for me either. The average person in South Central Los Angeles did not know anything about really how the CIA worked. They had an intuitive sense.
That you have a private network run by George Bush and Ollie North, not the CIA. You won't find the records in the CIA. They're not there. They're in these privatized intelligence agencies. Will you pursue that? Will you pursue Ollie North and George Bush and the massive documentation? All these gentlemen, like this gentleman here, the co-defendant of Ricky Ross.
They needed the money to finance the war in Nicaragua. They had the link. We know that from records now that they sent Blandon, who was a CIA operative, CIA, to school for marketing the product which we now know is cocaine.
Me and Ricky Ross is waiting to get sentenced Tuesday. And she what a judge gonna say to us come Tuesday?
May I just say that the question which was asked of us by the judge was Ricky Ross ever an agent or a contract employee?
I already knew that from the beginning of dealing with Danilo Blandon that he was sending supplies and things of that nature, computers and guns to Nicaragua to fight a war.
Ricky had already served a 5.5-year sentence for dealing crack, but was now given a second 20-year sentence after being set up by his former partner Blandon, while Oliver North walked away as a hero, wealthy and free to try his hand at politics.
Oliver North was being promoted by the Christian Coalition, and to them he was the last white hope that they were going to have for a right-wing Christian to run for U.S. Senate in Virginia.
During the 1986 Kerry Commission, Oliver North's crimes were exposed to the American public, and yet today Oliver North is not only a free man, he has his own show on the Fox News network.
It's amazing that Oliver North has his own TV show, and hopefully when I get out, I plan on having my own.
I think the prevailing view on Wall Street is anyone stupid enough to buy drugs deserves to die. And if you can make money from them while they're doing it, that's great. And if that's imposing a crime wave on a community away from Wall Street, that's okay. There's no drug crime on Wall Street.
I don't like it. They pay cash, right? They pay cash.
One of the important facets of the discussion should be what I call conspiracy theories. There are lots of folks out there, and there are books written on this by people who are in a position to know. Former DEA agents, former CIA operatives, things like that. And they tell stories about huge amounts of money, large-scale corruption in the big parts of government, etc.
talk about. But did the CIA know that drugs were coming into the United States of America and help it get here? The answer to the question is yes.
Absolutely.
Does the CIA do this on a regular basis? The answer to the question is?
Absolutely. The CIA is the kingpin, the Don.
So you're saying that the CIA is the kingpin of the head of the United States Mafia?
Look, I've put thousands of people in jail. Thousands. DEA gave a British writer once a figure of 3,000. It was a lot more than that. I've never failed in putting a case before court, conspiracy cases, undercover cases. I've never lost a case.
The government's ability and willingness to spy on people globally was similarly considered a conspiracy theory, until Edward Snowden recently disclosed this violation to the world. Also, like current whistleblowers, including Snowden and Bradley Manning, who are humiliated by the press and, in Manning's case, tortured in a U.S. prison before being convicted of 19 charges. Courageous individuals who speak out about the U.S. government's role in smuggling drugs and supporting drug lords are largely ridiculed and ignored. This so-called conspiracy theory has been discussed and documented for decades, yet the phony drug war persists. In 1993, Robert Bonner, former head of the DEA, told CBS News the CIA imports drugs into the United States.
The head of the DEA at the time, Robert Bonner, said that a ton of pure cocaine worth hundreds of millions of dollars had been smuggled into the United States. And he blamed the CIA, saying the agency had joined the Venezuelan National Guard in drug smuggling.
Let me understand what you're saying. A ton of cocaine was smuggled into the United States of America by the Venezuelan National Guard?
Well,
in cooperation with the CIA?
That's exactly what appears to have happened.
As a response to Bonner's admission, Frederick Hitz, the CIA's Inspector General, told a congressional committee that the CIA has a history of working with drug dealers. In fact, Hitz said the agency secured a waiver from the Department of Justice in the 1980s, allowing them to conduct drug smuggling activities. According to Alfred McCoy, historian and author, the U.S. government's management of the drug trade can be traced to World War II. He claims the CIA and other intelligence agencies facilitated the establishment of new hubs for opium production, heroin refining, and drug distribution in Southeast Asia after the suppression of the American and Turkish heroin trades. This Asian heroin haven became known as the Golden Triangle. McCoy says American involvement in the worldwide drug trade had gone far beyond coincidental complicity. Embassies had covered up involvement by client governments. CIA contract airlines had carried opium, and individual CIA agents had winked at the opium traffic. As an indirect consequence of American involvement in the Golden Triangle until 1972, opium production steadily increased. Southeast Asia's Golden Triangle grew 70% of the world's illicit opium, supplied an estimated 30% of America's heroin, and was capable of supplying the United States with unlimited quantities of heroin for generations to come. He claims the CIA does not typically handle drugs, however. Instead, they provide transport, arms, and political protection to drug lord allies. More famously, in 1986, the Iran-Contra affair revealed that CIA and Contra forces smuggled drugs and weapons to fund combat operations.
There are a lot of questions about who really was involved and why.
2 men in jail in Miami awaiting trial, an air charter company owner and one of his pilots, say some Contras sold drugs for weapons. The pilot, Gary Betzner, is a confessed, convicted drug smuggler. In a statement, he said he made 3 drug deliveries for men his boss told him were Contra officers, backed by U.S. agents.
I do not deny that as a pilot I smuggle my share of illegal substance, but by the same token I also smuggle my share of weapons in exchange for those illegal substances, with the full knowledge and assistance of both the DEA and CIA.
Once the drugs were in the United States, the U.S. government propped up drug dealers like Ricky Ross, aka Freeway Rick, a Southern California dealer, to sell the goods. Ross was running a massive operation the Los Angeles Times called the Walmart of crack dealing.
Ricky Ross is right now facing a life sentence, but he says he deserves to be a free man. Why? Because he says the CIA used him as a pawn to sell drugs to help fund the secret war in Nicaragua. Take a look at this tape.
If it was good for them to sell drugs, then it should have been good for me to sell drugs. The money from the drugs went to buy guns for the Contras.
Ricky Ross was selling cocaine to the point of making $3 to $4 million a day. He sold so much cocaine, it hurt his fingers to count the money. Not only in Los Angeles, but in Cincinnati, in St. Louis, all the way across America. So some can say, and this is the reason why people are so angry at you in your article, is that Ricky Ross, the dope dealer, was supplied by the CIA because Blandón was an operative for the CIA, correct?
Blandón and Meneses were working for an army that was a wholly owned subsidiary of the CIA. They were meeting with CIA agents. Blandón, and this came out in court. I mean, Danilo Blandón is now a government witness. He works for the Drug Enforcement Administration, and we've paid him, I don't know, $166,000 over the last 18 months because he's such a good informant. So they put him on the witness stand in Ricky Ross's case, and he testified that in 1981, he went to Honduras, he met with the commander, the military commander of the CIA's army, and he was instructed to go raise money in California for this Contra army. And he was told that the ends justified the means.
And those ends being sell cocaine if you have to.
Well, look, he was in the room with the Nicaraguan representative of the Cali cartel, Mr. Meneses, and he was in the room with a government marketing expert named Danilo Blandón. Now, if they weren't talking about selling cocaine, I don't know what they were talking about.
In 1996, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Gary Webb wrote, "For the better part of a decade, a San Francisco Bay Area drug ring sold tons of cocaine to the Crips and Bloods street gangs of Los Angeles and funneled millions in drug profits to a Latin American guerrilla army run by the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency." The U.S. government's control of the drug trade is also apparent in Afghanistan, where according to the United Nations Drug Control Program, opium cultivation increased 657% in 2002, which was shortly after the NATO occupation began. Afghanistan is currently the largest opium producer, accounting for 70% of the world's heroin supply last year. Nearly 900 tons of opium and 375 tons of heroin are trafficked from Afghanistan annually. Moreover, the number of people dying from heroin overdoses in NATO countries is actually higher than the number of soldiers killed in Afghanistan, which has not stopped U.S. military members from guarding the opium fields.
In western Kandahar, poppy farmers score, till, harvest their crop, and the Americans do nothing to stop them. U.S. soldiers greet farmers.
Can you show me which poppy field is yours?
They commiserate with farmers having a bad harvest.
Tell them I'm very sorry for his field this year, and hopefully he has a better harvest next year.
And in one case, they even paid a farmer $1,000 after U.S. and Afghan special forces burned his crop.
If you can come down to the base or on my next visit, I'll make a payment.
This is controversial. The opium trade is the Taliban's main source of funding.
Last year, a spokesman for the Chihuahua state government in Mexico told Al Jazeera the U.S. government does not fight drug traffickers, but merely manages the drug trade. His comment came after the Fast and Furious scandal, where the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms provided Mexican drug gangs with 1,700 guns, including the AK-47 used in 2010 to kill Brian Terry, an American Customs and Border Protection agent.
The federal agency is now retaliating by firing the agent who blew the whistle on the mission that allowed thousands of guns to get into the hands of Mexican drug lords. That's known as Fast and Furious. Some of those weapons, 2 of them in fact, were found at the scene when Border Patrol agent Brian Terry was gunned down in December of last year. Now the ATF whistleblower, Vince Cefalu, joins me now. His badge was being taken away and your gun was taken away as well, correct?
That's correct. When I challenged it to them, they said that they were doing just what the attorneys had told them to do, which is the standard protocol anymore for decisions within this bureau.
You guys set this guy up to get shot. Whatever.
Fuck, right on, man. We got a kill, whether, you know, we knew he was a bad guy or not.
We were smoking, we were high, and Morlock's like, man, you know, we straight murdered that dude.
Why am I the only one that's not okay with this? Why is it just me?
Specialist Adam Winfield's father, Chris, warned the Army, but tragically, Army officials refused to investigate. His son now charged in the third killing that took place 3 months later.
Staff Sergeant Calvin Gibbs on patrol in Afghanistan 3 days after he allegedly orchestrated the murder of an Afghan civilian. If the charges are true, he used those medical shears tucked into the top of his flak jacket to cut off fingers as trophies.
He's crazy. There's something wrong with that guy. And I've seen him kill, you know, like I know he's killed dudes.
Specialist Jeremy Morlock, who is accused of taking part in 3 murders earlier this year, made that statement to Army investigators as he described Gibbs's actions.
Pulled out one of his grenades, American grenade, you know, popped it, throws the grenade, and then, you know, tells me Winfield, all right, dude, you know, whacks this guy, you know, kill this guy, kill this guy.
Winfield is Specialist Adam Winfield, who admitted to being a member of Gibbs's kill team.
That's what we called him, kill team.
And what did he mean by that?
He meant that he was going to kill people.
Winfield, too, is charged with murder.
It's pretty much the worst thing I've ever done in my life.
Looking back, was there any way that shooting could have been justified at all?
No.
Winfield claimed he was too afraid of Gibbs to blow the whistle.
What do you think he would do?
I think he would kill me.
And why do you think that?
He said it. He said if anyone ever ratted on them, he would kill them.
Another soldier, Emmett Quintal, told investigators what happened when a private named Stoner blew the whistle on drug use in the squad.
Gibbs sat down casually and told Stoner that if he snitched again, he would kill him, and that he has killed people before and he has no problems killing again. At that time, Staff Sergeant Gibbs had a cloth. He opened it and dropped it, and 3 human body fingers fell on the ground.
And yes, there are pictures of soldiers posing with the bodies of their victims. The Army is doing everything it can to keep those photos from becoming public.
Private network run by George Bush and Ollie North. Private network run by George Bush and Ollie North. Private network run by George Bush and Ollie North.
The real killing to be made in Queen Victoria's empire was from something far more pernicious than bird droppings. And it made some Britons rich beyond their wildest dreams. The former British island colony of Hong Kong is so densely packed with banking and trading firms, it's known as the world's most vertical city. The place lives, eats, and breathes money.
The story of how Hong Kong came to be British reflects the empire's often ruthless pursuit of profit. It's an extraordinary story, even if it is one of the most shameful in British history.
And yet this dark episode began innocently enough. It was born from the English passion for a cup of tea. The British were desperate and even sent a delegation to China. They begged the emperor to open up his country and take some British products in exchange for tea. They presented him with all sorts of trinkets, games and curiosities, scientific instruments and toys. But he remained resolutely unimpressed.
We possess all things, said the emperor. I set no value upon things strange or ingenious, and I have no use for your country's manufactures.
But to get the tea they craved, the British had one thing to trade that many Chinese craved even more: opium. The drug was illegal in China, though the ban was widely ignored. There were an estimated 12 million peasants addicted to opium. The authorities there called it a deadly poison, ruining the minds and morals of our people. The British grew opium poppies in India. There they processed it in factories on a colossal scale. Finally, it was shipped to China and sold to smugglers. With the profits, British traders bought Chinese tea. Two men in particular made a handsome profit out of opium. One was William Jardine, the son of a Scottish farmer. The other was his business partner and fellow Scot, James Matheson. From boats moored off the Chinese mainland, they sold industrial quantities of opium to be trafficked into China. At the time, selling opium wasn't illegal in Britain, nor did it cause them any moral qualms.
Jardine himself said that trading in opium was the safest and most gentlemanly speculation I'm aware of, and his partner Matheson thought it no more than morally equivalent to selling brandy or champagne in Britain. Business was just business.
In 1839, the Chinese emperor decided he'd had enough. He ordered more than 1,000 tons of British-supplied opium to be seized and destroyed. The British government was outraged. It invoked a sacred and very convenient principle, the principle of free trade. Britain had to be allowed to trade what and where she liked, especially in the case of opium.
Opium was making Britain rich. It soon accounted for over a fifth
of the income of the government of India. Two mighty empires, each convinced of their own superiority, were now set on collision course. The Opium Wars were about to begin. Britain's first ocean-going iron warship, the Nemesis, built in Liverpool, was sent out to take on the Emperor's navy. It helped destroy much of it in a single afternoon. The Chinese had no choice but to surrender and to open 5 ports to British trade. China had been forced. Hong Kong was one of Britain's prizes from the Opium Wars. Close to the Chinese mainland, it was perfect for trading with the newly opened Chinese Empire. Matheson moved his headquarters to Hong Kong in January 1841. Profits from the opium trade doubled. So this most bustling of British colonies was built on a drug which stupefies people. Even more remarkably, the British continued to ship opium into China until well into the 20th century. Hong Kong grew at an astonishing rate. A new bank was founded to service the China trade, the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank. We know it as HSBC. Today, Hong Kong is a hothouse for global finance. But what about the company that played such a large part in founding Hong Kong's prosperity? Jardine Matheson & Co. Well, they're still here and still doing very well. These are the modern headquarters of Jardine Matheson. The round windows have earned it the local nickname, the building of 1,000 orifices. At least, that's the polite version.
drugs in America. Okay, the first reason they will never legalize drugs in America is because the government makes way too much money putting our brothers and sisters in fucking jail, okay? That's first of all, okay? For bullshit. I ain't talking about rich, I'm talking about wealth. Wealth is passed down from generation to generation. You can't get rid of wealth. Rich is some shit you can lose with a crazy summer and a drug habit.